I have heard from Richard that you are busy looking at different parables of Jesus. And when he said that, he didn't say that I need to preach on a parable, but at the beginning of last year I preached a few Sundays through the parable of the father and the two lost sons. And so I'd like to look at that this morning, Luke chapter 15. And while you're looking up Luke chapter 15, I think it's one of those parables that most Christians know from when they are young. It's also a parable that even in the world sometimes they talk about aspects of the parable. It's one that I have known and preached on also over the years, and especially the aspect of the lost son, the young son coming to his senses and repenting and going back to his father. But it was 2 years ago, by reading or listening, I can't remember, to Tim Keller, and also reading the book by Henry Nouwen. And I think I read the book in Dutch, but I think in English it would be called Finally Home. In Dutch it is Eindelijk Thuis. It's the book that he based on the painting of Rembrandt van Rijn on the prodigal son. And that gave me some new insights, and so I want to give credit to where credit is due. And I trust that this morning the Spirit of God will minister to each of us as we look at this parable. The chapter, in this chapter, Jesus tells 3 different parables. The first one is about the lost sheep. The second one is about the lost coin, or the penny. And the third one is about the one we're going to be looking at. We know it as the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son, but actually there are 2 lost sons, and we're going to see that this morning. In these parables we see that there is concern about that which is strayed, has wandered off, and is lost. And there is concern about those who are lost. Every time when the lost object or the lost person is found, there is great joy and celebration. And so I would like us to look first of all at the youngest lost son, and I'd like to read from verse 11 of chapter 15 up until 24. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate, or of my inheritance." So the father divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. This young man in the parable that Jesus tells, by way of reading the story, but when we read the story, we come to the conclusion that he was an immature man. A man that had a problem with himself. He was egocentric. He was also impulsive. Like many of us, immature, it's all about me. Give me what I want. Do for me what I want, what is best for me, and also impulsive. The young son in this story has financially disadvantaged his father and also his family. How do you say has he done that? At that time and in that culture, it was customary for the oldest son to receive at least double of what the other son or other children would receive, would inherit. And that inheritance normally came free, as it does today, when the father would die. But in this story that Jesus tells, the younger son asks for his inheritance while the father is still alive. He wants it, and he wants it now. And the wealth of his father would probably have been in real estate. And in order for the father to give the son his portion, he probably would have to sell something of his estate in order to obtain a third that he can give to the young son, because he has two sons in the story. And the father complies. He does what is necessary to make money free to give the younger son his part of the inheritance. And in that way, he has disadvantaged his father, because the father now loses a third of what he has, and he loses a son. And the family also lose a son, a brother, but the extended family also have to now do with less, because that third could have made more money. Not only has he disadvantaged his father and his family, but he's also disgraced his father. By asking for your inheritance while your dad is still alive, you're actually showing no respect, and you're dishonoring your father. In fact, what is happening, you're wishing him dead. You're saying, "I wish you were dead so that I could get my part of the inheritance." And so the father, by losing a part of his property, loses a part of himself. And in that situation, he loses his status in the eyes of the community. He seems to be a man that had some wealth and therefore was looked up to in the community. And now he loses status, because the people will not understand how a father can respond in that way to such a rebellious, cheeky son. So he disadvantages his father, and he disgraces his dad by what he does. And so the son eventually gets what he asks for. The father does it. And the son leaves for a distant country, and we've read what happens. He takes his inheritance with him, not to invest it so that it can increase, but he goes and spends all his money on wild living. He squanders his entire inheritance. And when everything was gone and he had nothing more to eat, he came to his senses. And he thinks back. And often when we come to a crisis, when we're driven into a corner, we stop to think, we stop to rethink, we stop to consider. And he thinks back on the good times that he actually had. And now he thinks that the servants in his dad's place are far better off than he is. And so he decides to go back to his father. And the rebellious villain decides to make the journey back to his dad. And his father was waiting for him and welcomed him home with open arms. this licentious and immoral young man comes back to his father and is accepted and immediately forgiven by his dad. And he accepts the forgiveness. He sputters and he says, I'm not worthy, but he accepts the forgiveness because he also then goes to the party and surrenders to the embrace of a loving father. And he realizes that in spite of all that he has done, he is still loved. In spite of his arrogant, rebellious nature, he has still remained an heir of the family. Because by being welcomed back the way he was, he again becomes an heir of what his father has. And he's being restored. His homecoming is celebrated. There is great joy. Verse 22, bring quickly the best robe, says the father, and put it on my son, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. We read now from verse 25 as we look at the older lost son. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his dad, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. In fact, you know, when I die, everything now is yours because the younger son had gone. It is already yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and he's alive again. He was lost and is found. The older son is not an evil man. He has lived a good life. He has always been there with his dad. He's observed the required moral precepts. He's always kept to the rules. He has not done bad things. There's nothing bad in his life that we read about here. There are no bad things like his younger brother has done. He's always done his best. And once when he came back to the home, he hears music and dancing. There's a party, there's a feast. And then he was told that his young brother had come home, something he probably never expected. He'd never gone to look for his brother who had wandered off. And he hears that his father has now organized this big party for his brother, the brother who had left their dad and him in the lurch. He was not happy with the homecoming of his younger brother. In fact, the older brother should have gone to look for his younger brother when he'd wandered off. But he didn't. And now in verse 28, he was angry and he refused to go into the party. When life does not go the way that he wants it to go, he becomes very angry. This older brother has become resentful and embittered, full of bitterness. And he blames his father for welcoming back his younger brother. Dad, how can you do this? Look, after all he's done to you, he wished you dead. You've given him a third of the inheritance. Look what he's done. He's been to prostitutes. He's wasted it. The family inheritance, he's wasted it. How can you be so kind to our rebellious brother? How can you be so gracious and so benevolent towards that loser? Verse 30, but when the son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf. Dad, how can you? This is not all, and this is not fair. If there is anyone who deserves a party, it is me. I've always stuck to the rules. By his attitude, he's saying that he is superior to his younger brother. He'd always done his best. He'd always stuck to the rules. He always went to church. He always prayed after the meal, before the meal. Read his Bible. And he's proud of his moral status and his loyal service. And with contempt, he looks down on those who do not do as well as he do. Look, these many years I've served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. Dad, I can't remember you ever giving me a party while I've always obeyed you and your instructions. I may not be perfect, Dad, but at least I did not mess up like this son of yours. But what motivated his obedience? He'd always stuck to the rules. He'd always been there with his dad and for his dad. Was it out of love for his dad? Was it to please his father? Or was it because of fear of his dad? We will all know people who are very religious, and we may even come from a background of religiosity. And we do things because they were taught us. We do things because we see other people do it. How many people, and we see them, go to church with a little Bible that comes from the shelf on Sunday morning and goes back to the shelf afterwards? They stick to the rules. They do the things that the law says. But there's no personal relationship. Do they do those things out of love for the Father? Or do we do them because we are afraid of the Father? Many people, even in Holland, have a fear of God that He's standing over the balcony of heaven with a big stick. And if we don't stick to His rules, He will, in a nice South African word, klap ons. Many do what God commands because they are afraid of what God will do when we are disobedient. Did the son do it because it was his duty, because he was supposed to? I hope that no one sits here this morning because it is your duty to be here. And I know that sometimes children, teenagers in home, the dad and the mom say, until such an age you have to go, and so you may sit here as young people and say, it's my duty. I trust that soon that will change when you meet the Father personally. Did this older son, whom now you can see was also lost, did he do this because of the eventual reward that he would receive? So if I do all the things that my dad wants me to do, if I work hard on the farm, if it was a farm, if I stick to the rules and stay on the good side of my dad, one day the reward will be mine. Look at my brother. He's wasted it now. Now it's gone. And so there was a sense maybe with the older son, if I do all that my father requires of me to do, he owes me something. And our Father owes us nothing. He's given us everything out of grace. And I wonder if this older brother sees the fact that he's in that family, part of that family, that it is a privilege. It is a privilege. It was nice to hear the positive feedback and testimonies that some of you shared. It is a privilege to travel. It is a privilege for us the country where we were born and raised, and we left 23 years ago. It's a privilege for us to come back. And the fact that we are able to come and minister in churches, it's not a right. It really is a privilege. And to come back in the country and with some pride show our friends from Holland, it's a privilege. Did the son see it as a privilege of being able to work for his dad, with his dad? And so what happens? This older son, he keeps his distance. He's not happy at all. He thinks only of himself. And now we see he thinks of himself. The younger son thought of himself. It's the basic problem of sin. And he does not want to accept and forgive his brother. His conceitedness prevents him from entering the party. And he cannot accept the fact that the father has forgiven his dropout brother. His jealousy prevents him from taking part in the celebration and the joy that his father is experiencing. His anger prevents him from sharing in that joy. And how many people, how many religious people, when they see somebody who's been set free and who's been able to enjoy worshiping God in whatever format, that's not the issue, but he can see that that person is so joyful and grateful in the Lord. How many of the religious people look down upon those that enjoy that freedom? And there's contempt. And so what happens is that the older son remains a spectator. A distant observer, and he doesn't come in to the house of the father. He stays outside. No, he says, I will not welcome my brother. No, I'm not going to my dad's party. My brother doesn't deserve this. I deserve this, and so I'm not going to celebrate. I'm not going to rejoice that the coin has been found. I'm not going to rejoice that one of the 100 sheep has been found. Henry Nouwen says, if God welcomes sinners home, then they who trust in this God must also welcome others home. If God is merciful, then those who love this God of mercy should also be merciful. If God forgives, then we who have been forgiven by this God must forgive others also. If God accepts us, then we also have to accept others. And how often are we not like the older son? I will accept him if, based on these conditions. So we conclude, I'm not at the end of the sermon, but this part of it, we conclude. Both brothers are egocentric. And both were interested in what they could get from the father in different ways. But they were more interested in what they could get from the father than the father himself. And none of them really knew their father. It's obvious from the story there was a distance. They didn't know the actual heart, the intentions of this loving dad. Both of them eventually, or both of them at some point in their lives were estranged from the father. And the younger son comes back to his father, and we may conclude that the relationship was restored. But at the end of the story, we know nothing about any restoration in the relationship, the estranged relationship between father and older son. Both sons, in a sense, had wandered off and were thus lost. But the youngest son became aware of his lost condition, and so he repented and returned. He did something about his lostness, and he walked into the ever-welcoming arms of his father and received forgiveness and cleansing and restoration and a new life. While the oldest son, who is also lost, doesn't realize his lostness. And so there are many people around us, many people, and maybe here this morning, regularly coming to church, perhaps even reading the Bible, even able to quote things out of the Bible. But if you do not have a personal relationship with God the Father through His Son, Jesus Christ, you're lost. And like the older son, you may not realize it. I hope this morning, if that is you, you are now hearing your condition. And there's an invitation to come in. The older son is blind to his spiritual condition. And he doesn't want to go in and stays away. And there's an invitation to come in. Jesus has prepared the way. The older son in this parable reflects the Pharisees and the scribes. When Jesus starts at this telling these parables in verse 1, it says of this chapter, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them.'" These religious leaders were annoyed and offended by Jesus, especially because Jesus mingled with and forgave evil and bad people. And the religious older brothers often see God as a demanding master, a difficult boss. They don't see Him as a loving Father. Pharisees and religious older brothers usually keep to the letter of the law. They dutifully do what is required of them. And they're often very loyal and reliable in the things that have to be done. As I said, they read their Bible, they go to church, they teach the children legalistic principles that are true, but they don't have to be legalistic when the life of God is in them. And they find it difficult to spontaneously thank and worship God from the bottom of their hearts. And there's a lack of that in their lives. The reason is because there's a lack. There's no relationship, personal relationship. In the story, we also read of the Father, of course. And we all know that the Father in the story, the parable that Jesus tells, is a picture of God the Father. And He loves, this Father in the story loves both sons equally. And His heart goes out to both sons as the heart of the Father goes out to all people. He has no favorite child. The older brother may have felt that. Now while the son was gone, he was the favorite child. And now the younger brother comes back. He may now feel, oh, now my dad is preferring my younger brother. But with God, He loves us all equally, and He has no favorite children. No matter how different we are, no matter what we've done, no matter where we come from, He wants everyone to feel welcome in His home. And God, in the story, the Father is on the lookout, and our Father is on the lookout. And our Father sent His Son to find us, to bring us back. Our Father was on the lookout long before we realized that He was there. He was on the lookout while we were doing our own thing and wandering off. He was on the lookout while we were the religious ones looking down on others who weren't doing it as well as we are doing it. He's on the lookout. He's calling. He's calling. Searching for all sons who have gone astray, who are lost, who are tired. He's on the lookout for all daughters who are injured and are burdened and lost. He urgently calls every one of us to come home because He desires to bring us into His fold. He desires to bring us into His family. He desires us to be in His paradise. He wants to give us new life, abundant life. He invites black and white. He invites, now the Dutch is coming there, young and old, male and female, married and unmarried, rich and poor. That's the Father. With open arms, waiting for us to come back. And then lastly, Jesus Christ is the true older brother. He left everything to go and look for his younger brothers and sisters who are lost. He came to earth to seek and to save the lost. He came to show us the love of the Father. He has come to deliver us from our slavery, from our self-centeredness. He has come to free us from our stubbornness and our selfish life, from our anger and resentment, from our bitterness, envy, jealousy, from our pride, but also the pain. When the younger son returns, there is great joy. And the father brings out the best because of the son's homecoming. And the father wants everyone to join in the celebration of the one who has come home, who was lost. His joy was intense. And the older one, could not enjoy it. The love of the Father forces no one, but he stands out there and he's looking and he's calling, and he sent his son, our older brother, the true older brother, to say, come home. Because this true older brother wants to celebrate with his dad. There is nothing he wants more than to heal us from our inner darkness. But he leaves the choice up to us. And we must be willing to allow ourselves to be found. We must be willing to allow God to bring us home. We must be willing to let God heal us through his love. One of the important themes of the story, one of the central themes is forgiveness. I'm not going to speak on that this morning. Something separate. But this Father forgives. And he wants to forgive you. I don't know this morning if you identify yourself with a lost son. Generally, I think I'm not. My life, as I look back at it, doesn't really fit the picture of the younger son. I didn't do the things that the younger son in the story did. I came to know Jesus as my personal Savior at a young age. And yet there are aspects in my life that I can identify with the younger son. Wanting to do my own thing, thinking of myself. Saying to God, give me now what I need, what I want. I think that I would then maybe say I'm more like the older son. I grew up religiously. I learned the things. I jumped through the hoops. And there came a point that I realized it's not about doing the things, it's about having a personal relationship with the Father. I don't know where you are. And perhaps, and I think most likely most of us will find ourselves identifying with both sons somewhere in our lives. But if you're the younger son and you're sitting by the pigs, you may feel, I've blown it so bad, my father will never want me back. It could be true, and unfortunately sometimes in the human sphere, a natural father may not want you back. But there is a Father in heaven who this morning says, my son, I see you sitting there by the pigs. You have disadvantaged your family. You have hurt me. You did reject Jesus when there was opportunity. And you turned your back on me. You turned your back on Jesus. You've closed yourself off for the work of the Holy Spirit. And now you are sitting there among the pigs. But I want you to know, my arms are open wide. Come home. And perhaps you're the older son and you're struggling with the freedom in your relationship with the Father. You're struggling to experience the joy of the Lord, which can be your strength. And you look down on others that have more freedom and you find them so weird. God has weird and wonderful children in his home. And you feel bitterness sometimes. And you feel, how can they enjoy the blessing of the Lord when they have actually lived such an immoral life? I've always been so good. If you're struggling as an older son this morning, the Father says, my son, this child was dead. He's come back. Do you know why the father said that his child was dead? He wasn't literally dead. But because the son had done what he did, the younger son, there was a sense in which now he was considered dead. There was no more heir to the family. And because in the society or this community, the father had, by what he did, had declared his son to be dead, and when the son left, he was dead. And all of us, at some point in time, were dead, or perhaps some are dead. And the father says, come home, come home. And you know, I brought this, and then I did this in 3 or 4 weeks, preached on this series. But one of the aspects is, what if we as a church are a church that makes people feel welcome in the home of the Father, like this Father demonstrates. And we are to be such a home. And your home group and my home group that we attend or lead is to be such a place where people, the young and the older, lost people, sons, daughters, can find a place of forgiveness, where there is embracing, where when they come in from their pigsty, from their pride, from their arrogance, from their religiosity, come back, there is a party, because even if we don't celebrate it, there is celebration in heaven. But if we show that more often and open our doors, our lives, for people to come, know that they're welcome to come in and find a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, we are fulfilling what Jesus is teaching in this parable. Amen.